Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. After obviously a very busy week for various reasons, finally getting around to the Final Fantasy V character reviews, kicking things off with Bartz here to start. And per usual, it's going to be the character overview, kind of getting a quick hit summary, the base and total stat analysis, leading up to some other metrics about the stats, summarizing all that into the report card, followed up by the general thoughts where I can kind of give some insight into some points specifically, as we then go through the passives, counters, the job abilities and auto priority, the TMR review to kind of delve deeper into the character, and then finally just some quick hit thoughts on the optimization pieces. So kicking things off here, Bart's a brand new light unit added to the game as part of the Final Fantasy V collaboration. They've given him the unique main job World Wayfarer with the Martialist and Viking subjobs. He does equip swords here. Sorry for the typo. Swords. He is the warrior type of that class. He also equips armor, helm, and accessories, so a little bit heavier bulk on the side of the equipment. Move of 3, jump of 1 as another 100 cost unit. Now, I do think he is a 50 faith unit as well. Now, we look at the metrics about his kit. He does have a max range of up to 5. We'll see on the main job there. He does have 2 AoEs and 2 single targets on the main job, so relatively balanced from that perspective. From a weapon type resistance, obviously very hard slash niche here. 25% to slash, 10% to missile, some nice 5% to both magic and strike, but then only negative being the 5% to pierce. Overall, no real weaknesses, but obviously a very strong affinity for slash type damage, as we kind of see that more and more often in the current state of the game. Now again, being a 50 faith unit, don't have to worry terribly about status elements and being afflicted by things, but 50% to Berserk is certainly nice. There is a uptick of that status effect in the game currently. 50% to Toad is also nice for at least, some of that population in the middle ranks where you see a lot of Lucia still. 10% to Confusion helps, but overall, neither good nor bad. There's some strong ones here for resistances. Now for the Mastery ability and the Dream ability, just to get a head start on seeing where some of his kit strengths are, they do give him 10 AoE resistance innately and a permanent 10% slash res pen as well. And on the Dream, there is a 20% decrease in AP consumption. This is going to be a major theme throughout his kit. They also give him 50% reaction block rate and obviously the upgrade to one of the abilities. So looking at the base stats overall here, now HP definitely a little bit higher. Obviously a really good starting spot for many of the physical damage dealers that we see nowadays. I don't really think this is a strength nor weakness, but definitely a big thumbs up for where they started him at. Attack stat, though, among some of the highest in the game here. Very strong base attack stat, which is a very good thing for putting him in other variety of teams. We'll see that as the theme when we go through his abilities as a potential rainbow unit here. But high base attack obviously is great, just knowing that you can put attack percentage on a handful of items, and he's going to scale well with that. Now for base agility, maybe just a step down, but base agility really doesn't mean a ton. They usually make up for these stats with the board notes and other passives and whatnot, but overall agility, maybe just a smidge on the slower side from a base perspective. He doesn't end up below average from agility though, so don't let this mislead you. Dexterity, right about average, nothing wrong with that. And luck definitely skews a little bit above average, but not so much so that it's a particular strength of his to lean into per se. Now for the total stat analysis, kind of transforming those charts into one. Again, seeing that same story here. Very strong attack stat, excellent HP stat, overall dexterity and luck starting at a pretty good spot. And when you incorporate the mastery abilities, the board notes, things of that nature, there are some things here where obviously you get a ton of agility points to get him above average, but overall really not a lot of changes from the base stats when you include those other stats. And just looking at that agility stat in particular, they give him 12 points on the node, which is definitely above average when you look at the UR cast in general, but overall very strong for what they did for stats right out of the gate. Now as you look how some of these stats affect some of the others, overall agility here, he does start out at 79 agility. He does have a passive that can ramp that up to about 86. Like I said, overall ends up being above average from the agility perspective. Really nice that he has that passive to allow this flexibility. We look at the crit hit and crit avoid, that dexterity stat being kind of in the middle. He's got a couple percentage points to bump it up on the board notes, but overall relatively average from a dexterity perspective. And critical avoidance, kind of the same idea. These are par for the course, not really something to hone in on, but he does seem to have some extra attention to crit damage, at least from what they've done from the vision card and the Esper perspective for what they tried to combine with him. So there's probably a build there to explore, but for now the takeaway is that not necessarily a big thing of his. Now for accuracy, base accuracy is relatively average, maybe just a bit above average, nothing wrong with that. He does have a passive that you will have on a majority of the time though, which amplifies that accuracy quite a bit, and so he's definitely a tier below many of your most accurate units, but I do think it's salvageable with a decent amount of help, obviously, as far as the trust stones and whatnot. Now we look at the evasion, the very bottom of the gradient of what could potentially be considered evade. I don't consider him an evade unit. I don't think there's any potential there at all, but at least obviously going over it. Now for the report card overall, Effective HP, I'm going with a B plus here. Now, he does have 0 defense and spirit innately. He does have 10 AoE res on the mastery ability, another 12 from a passive, and then up to 20 on one of his main buffs. So AoE res, pretty nice here. His health pool is, being post 3rd anniversary, definitely above average for what most of the wars in the game currently offer. So that's really the big thing for the effective HP in his corner is that, that 25% slash res, not really having any strong negatives, and a very good HP pool that gets in my head above many characters. Now, survivability, I'm going with a C here, though. Although the effective HP is very nice, I don't think there's a lot to really like from a survivability perspective. He is courage capable from the martialist sub-job. That being said, I don't think the AI is always optimal to be running that. We'll talk about that more in the ability section, but he does technically have a 50% heal back of damage he does on the 120 ability, which is fine, but you're not going to use that ability all the time. So although it's nice, it's not a big part of his kit. And he does have regen on the main sub job as a buff. So it's potentially there, but again, you're talking about 2 pieces of survivability tied to the sub jobs that really kind of hit or miss when you talk about AI priorities overall. So overall survivability, I don't think there's a lot here to really love. I'm giving him a C for just kind of being average, unfortunately. Now damage, though, I'm going with a B plus here. And this might be just a smidge on the lower side. The thing is, he gets 30 slash res pen with a sword, up to 70 with a buff. You can get 40 defense pen on that main passive at all times, which is excellent. Maybe another 40 on another passive, too. You can combine them together. So you can get up to very, very high slash res pen and defense pen. We'll see on the general thoughts, those exact calculations. Great attack. Overall, his damage, he has some imperils in his kit that scale off his own abilities, so he will cleave through a lot of resistances to do the damage he wants to do. Overall, definitely a good thing. Probably an A-. But my preliminary test, it hasn't been off the charts, if that makes sense. Now, agility, going with a B here. The innate agility is slightly above that average, 79 versus 77. With passives, you get up to 85, which is definitely in the higher tier of characters. Going with a B here overall for agility because you may not always have that passive on, so just kind of giving him a round down there. Accuracy, I'm going with a B here too. Again, maybe a little inflated. B- might be a little more accurate when you talk about pragmatically building him, but he does have great typical accuracy with his passive. He will need some help to do so, but the game has given him more than enough things to build up his accuracy that overall not in the worst starting spot overall. Now evasion, going with a C here, barely on the evasion spectrum. Although it's a C grade, I don't think C is good enough to be considered an evade unit. I don't think the potential's there. The movement, going with a B here, he does have a move +1 passive, which is tied to that agility. So overall, really strong combination of things there for him. The auto ease of use, though, I'm going with a C here. He does have a lot of difficult buffs to potentially prioritize, which is why when I brought up the courage capability or the regen capability, there's a couple of things to consider. And although his attacks are pretty straightforward, I think AI-wise, people might have a little trouble getting him to work perfectly, particularly considering that his survivability is a C, that if you don't get that right, he's going to get punished quite easily. Now, for the game disruption, I am going with a B here. Obviously, being a free unit to acquire, Light already having a very strong presence in the game, being an excellent free unit. And I do think he is a great potential rainbow unit just to splash into a couple teams for some of the utility he brings. And I do think overall, pragmatically speaking, a B for the game disruption just because so many people are likely going to use him. I don't necessarily think that's a reflection of how strong he could be, but obviously a thumbs up for him there. Passive abilities, I'm going with an A though. Exceptional main passive with fantastic second options. We'll talk about that soon. The counter abilities, going with a B here, relatively average counters. I used to always give here an A for reflex, and although that's still very strong, the reduced counter chance that's present in the game makes that slightly less oppressive than it used to be, but B overall, definitely some good counters, and you'll likely see that reflected in the grades going forward for characters that have reflexes of certain types. Now, the overall job and kit, going with an A- here, very self-sufficient unit, little bit selfish with his utility, we'll see when we go through the abilities, but great for the modern era, great anti-courage unit. That to me is where his main niche shines, particularly from a team utility perspective. For a final grade of a B+, a great potential staple of the light cast. He's an excellent free unit. Gumi's done a really good job with making the kits of these free units as of late, and he joins a cast of very strong characters that they've done so with. Overall, definitely a thumbs up for what Bartz can potentially bring to the table. And we look at the general thoughts overall here. Great at getting his own damage done. He's got a 38% slash imperil on his limit break, but it's only for himself. It doesn't apply for 3 turns or anything for other teammates to use, but it still obviously amplifies his damage there. So regardless of your percentage, he's going to imperil that on the limit break. The main AoE ability of his is also 30 AoE res down just on that cast. So same thing as the limit break. It doesn't linger for turns, so teammates can't use it. It's just for Bartz. but 30 AoE res down, obviously very strong considering the levels that we're getting up to right now, so he is going to obviously be able to do the damage that he wants to. You look at the defense pen potential, upwards of 90, where you get 40 on the main passive at a minimum, but you can get another 40 from a second passive, the usual 10 from the Trust Stone, and theoretically you could get 40 from the Viking sub-job buff, but I don't recommend that. But the point is that he does potentially get up to very high defense pen potential if that's a build you're going for. And the same thing for the slash res pen. He does have 100 slash res pen potential. He gets 20 from his weapon, which you'll see at the end, 10 from the mastery ability, 40 from a buff that he'll use potentially. That's why the AI is so important here. And you can get up to 35 from the Scion's light element vision card. So slash res pen, again, there's a lot of ways for him to do the damage that he wants to, even if it may not translate to his teammates taking advantage of those same imperils because they're temporary. Now, I also think a very strong point for him is exceptional AP management. He does have 20% decreased AP consumption on the Dream. He's got another 15% on his sword for a total of 35% decreased AP consumption. He's got a passive that will give him initial 15 AP and acquired AP extra of 40% should you choose to use it as the second. The Yuffie Vision card is warrior eligible here, and that does have 60% acquired AP on it, so although he may not use the evasion on it, the acquired AP is certainly an option. And Dark Bahamut, that vision card, that light and dark vision card, does have 25% acquired AP on it as well. And being a light unit, if you have that, you'll likely lean into that synergy. So overall, exceptional AP management for him. Now, great synergy with the current light element, in my opinion, obviously being slash-oriented. He does complement the Re-Razor move that we see with Winged Stern and Sylvie with his, not only his own courage move, but the follow-up attack, which we're going to see in the main kit here, that it does kind of complement both nicely. And the big thing on that extra follow-up hit is that none of the newer units have protect or shell removal. So this is a nice bit of a piece of utility to throw into the wrinkle of the current light units. I don't know if that's the best part about the ability, but it's definitely a very good part about the ability. Now, the Warrior Vision card cast is lacking, in my opinion. If you're trying to do a rainbow team of Warrior Vision cards, the Minotaur Vision card that is coming out right now, it's already out, very niche, so if you are leaning into the rainbow team, I don't think the vision cards are a strong motivator to do that. I really think it's the utility that drives that potential. The teammate buff, in my opinion, is also semi-redundant with what we see many other places. For teammates, it's 20 AoE res, which is fine, but again, everybody has that, and if you're using Wingstern, he already has that too. So sure, maybe you can decide which unit you want it on or off and change your movement. That's a nice flexibility piece, but it doesn't add a lot that's not already kind of everywhere at the moment, which is fine. It's not a bad thing. It's just semi-redundant. Now, I do think he has subpar PvE potential, in my opinion. He does have a 3-hit ability on the Martialist sub-job, but he has no permanent imperils, which is kind of a must, and that being the only multi-hit, I don't think there's a lot of upside considering what Light already has otherwise. Survivability, to me, relatively limited. Again, I don't think this is a strong point for him, and I think it's easily punished if you don't get the AI correct. But to that point, you will see the best upside with him with the most creative builders. This is one of those characters that can be kind of boom or bust based upon your skill and use of auto PvP. Now, I do think the 80% react block rate with his weapon is very, very strong. Being able to ensure that 100% of the time is an excellent piece of modern utility. Again, to get the damage done that you want to at all times and not have to worry about Dialdo proccing a physical damage down or a character having a reflex or something to that effect. I do think there is a disappointing lack of weapon versatility. This is more of a meme. In Final Fantasy Dissidia, one of the cool things about Bartz and part of Final Fantasy V is that you could make him any single class in the game he wanted. And so Dissidia, when they kind of brought him to life for the first time, leaned into this build where he could use every single weapon because in the main series game, he could be every single class. And so he is limited to swords here. So yeah, he only equips swords, not the other weapons, which is fine. This is more of a joke for those that are Final Fantasy V fans. Now we look at the passive abilities, going through these quickly. That exceptional main passive here, Swordsmanship of the Chosen, attack 24%, defense pen 40, accuracy 20, AoE res 12. That's like 3 passives in one, absolutely out of this world. I do think Battlefield Mobility is probably my second favorite for the agility in the move. That being said, I think there's a really strong case for Martialist Lore or even Explorer's Spirit, depending if you want that extra move or not. Sometimes you don't. So he does have some excellent second options here, and kind of a nice anti-missile niche with that 25%, but there's a lot of penetration on missile with some of the missile meta units, so that one maybe temper your expectations. Now the counter abilities, I do like Fluidity the best here, where that is that 15% of physical evasion straight up. I think that's stronger than defend, which is kind of the typical counter that we see from many other characters of the reduced physical damage. I don't think this is necessarily a strong point of his, but we've seen reflexes come in very, very clutch in certain places, so that's obviously a great thing for him to have against physical type damage. Now for the main job buffs, this is where things get very complicated and complex. Let me talk briefly about each one of these, then we'll talk about the AI priority. So first of all, Defiant Courage is increased slash res pen of 40 for 3 turns, and essentially activates this ability follow-up that if a teammate is standing within this diamond range of him, when they attack, Bartz will have a follow-up attack. Now all that matters is if that teammate is in range, it doesn't matter where the enemy is. If the enemy is 5 squares away, as long as that teammate is near Bartz, Bartz will still do damage to the enemy 5 squares away. That's all that matters, is the teammate is nearby. So this obviously is very, very strong for courage removal, where if a teammate brings someone to 1 HP, Bartz hits that follow-up. The big thing here is also that it dispels Protect and Shell. Now, the reason why I have tempered expectations on this is that if you figure by the time you get to that phase in the fight, Protect and Shell is typically on its second or third turn at that point anyway, and that dispel of Protect and Shell occurs at the very end of all of this. So it's not like it's a preemptive ability that dispels Protect and Shell. It likely is going to be wearing off anyway relatively soon, but still, very nice piece of utility. This is one of the strongest things about his kit, which is why I think the AI priority is very awkward. We'll get to that in a second, but Boko's Protection is his teammate buff that is a 70% barrier, 20 AoE res as well. But if you talk about the AI priority, from what I can tell so far in testing, he does prioritize that Martialist Courage ability first. Then theoretically, if you swap Subjobs and did as a main Subjob, this Life Water ability is that regen that also has slash attack. So his Subjob abilities both have a priority over this main job. Next is Boko's Protection, even if no teammates are nearby. So he will use it on himself and walk forward. And finally, Defiant Courage last. And TMR is somewhere in here. I actually don't know exactly. But this is very odd for me because Defiant Courage is the best thing about his kit. If you enter a battle and don't get this 40 slash res pen or the follow-up attack, Bartz is bad. I don't know how to say it. That relatively speaking, you are not nearly optimizing what he should be doing. So very important that no matter what you do, Defiant Courage ends up getting off as a skill. Now we look at the main job offensive here. 4 abilities, 2 AoE, 2 unit scaling. They're all slash attacks. They're all light based. One thing to point out here, Blade Blitz, which is the third ability, this is an upgrade after you use his Limit Break, that this ability gets a reduction in AP cost, but also gets an increase in the modifier. So this ability is normally not as good. It's normally 165%, not 200%, and it's normally 32 AP, not 20 AP. So very quickly, before we go through these, the range and heights of all these, you got a cross shape, you got a diamond shape, you got a straight line, you got a diamond targeting range. There's a lot of versatility here for the range and heights as well with some of these height ones. The big thing here with the AP is that all of these AP values you have to consider with that reduced AP from his mastery ability, that's that top number, but with his sword, which is the extra 15%, is this parenthetic number. So if you have a sword equipped, these abilities are all the parentheses numbers, which is very, very cheap for most of these. So the first ability, Attack and Magic Break, he does have an AoE Remove Courage. That is exceptional to add into the fact that he has got that follow-up attack as well. He does have that decreased AoE res on that single cast for himself for targets, and then he's got that reduced counter chance of 100% single target for 3 turns. So overall, there's some nice flexibility here, but again, the utility outside of that courage removal is really kind of limited to himself only. If we look at the Limit Break here, this is where you get that upgrade of that Blade Blitz ability, also the 38% imperil for just this cast. It's a 28 AP Limit Break, very strong, only 4 squares away, and so when you consider AI, he will likely opt for Blades Blitz first sometimes, because you can hit 5 squares away with this, which is definitely not optimal, that you do not want him using this before he uses the Limit Break, where Blade Blitz gets that upgrade. So that's kind of an interesting thing that Gumi did there for you to watch out for, obviously. And from a vision card perspective, I would never use this, but just mentioning it, he does have access to the Leviathan vision card ability. This has never been a good ability though, but obviously honorable mention. Now we talk about the sub-job here. World of Wayfarer, the Zen and Nudge ability is a little creative. Again, 20 AP. It's actually much cheaper than this. I didn't put the revised AP values here, but it's a weapon typeless ability. So it scales off nothing of weapon resists only single target resistance and light resistance. It's got a range of up to 5 squares away, but it requires direct line of sight in order to hit. And Life Water, that's that other buff I was talking about where it gives him regen, while also increasing the HP raised of 25% and slash attack 30 as long as regen is applied. So this is a nice buff for some of the survivability, but really kind of niche considering that you need to use his follow-up buff at all times. Now the Martialist sub, again, Relentless Stance is very strong overall as a buff, but priority-wise can be difficult. Other than that, 3-step Star Strike's probably my favorite here, that triple hit, but it's a little redundant with the reduced counter chance. That's the same thing as the main job. This is really for getting at that strike weakness that some people might have to not limit him to 100% slash type damage. And then finally the Viking subjob, which has never really been that strong as of late. This buff is a good buff, but really not for Bartz. I do think there's other better options, but overall, this is not the worst subjob. I just don't think it's optimal by any means. Now look at the TMR review. This is an armor type of equipment. Relatively good stats here for HP, defense, and spirit. The ability is a 2-time cast of 40% attack and dispel haste for 3 turns. Now this is slightly redundant with some of the other TMRs that we've had come out. I don't think there's a ton of extra upside here, particularly because it's an armor, not an accessory, which at least one of the others is. But overall, not the worst one. Obviously, haste is very popular, so it's got some upside, but I don't think you're going to see this one very often, quite frankly. Now, for the job-based vision cards, very limited at the moment in terms of building out a warrior sword set or any kind of real synergy outside of that. Although there's a lot of vision cards here, I really only think there's one so far, and that's the Hyo vision card with that 18% agility. That's really a staple of how you would form your team. The rest of these are good. They're really sub-slot vision cards though, so not a strong case for the job-based vision cards for him at all. The Esper Synergies, this is also a difficult one because a couple of his best ones are the brand new ones here. Now, I do think that Minotaur is one of the best ones, and offensively speaking, light attack and human killer are your priorities. Slash attack's definitely the third. Accuracy as well if you're going for those evade builds. The rest is matchup specific for building those elemental resistances, but Minotaur offers at least that dark resistance, which is good for that matchup light versus dark. It's got the light attack and the slash attack here as well as some general attack percent. Overall, very strong Esper, in addition to Sildra, who has the accuracy nodes here, some slash res. It's got attack percent, which is great for that base attack, and a bunch of slash attack nodes too, so you can mix and match these a couple ways. But other than that, Odin and Dark Odin, really the de facto others. There's some other good candidates, but these are the best for. Anything beyond these, I think you're reaching for matchup-specific things, so I'll stop there for recommendations. And finally, the weapon optimization. His sword is my favorite overall. The slash res pen of 20 I love, with the AP consumption decrease of 15% and the extra reaction block rate of 30% to get him up to 80% reaction block permanently. You get a 15 slash attack as well. I do like the stats on these two builds here between the assault and the aim. I think both of these have strong cases to make one of each. The critical one is fine. This one's more of just like a well-rounded sword that you kind of get a mix of all of them without really leaning into any one in particular. And then just speaking from a pure damage perspective, I do think the Sword of Light is probably optimal here for that 45 total mod with the 10 slash res pen, including what you can put on the rest of your trust stones. And obviously the attack stat here is relatively similar. It's not as good from an accuracy perspective, but this is really more for those characters that don't have a lot of slash res on them, that you're really trying to maximize your damage with the modifier. So this is definitely a good second option, but that's the Bartz review overall. Obviously this is a very good character. I do think that it's going to be kind of hit and miss for some people to use successfully. I think there are a lot of characters that you can use more reliably, but there is a lot to like about him as another free unit given to us. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to you all soon.